tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, well, I've been doing a lot of phase zero work. So
imagine that.
My name is Adam Cheatham. I'm in Grand Junction, Colorado, on the western slope. My background's in technology from a business perspective, right? So the concept here at Third Stage that we really like to focus on is that business should be enabled by technology. And if the technology that you have in place is hindering your business from achieving its goals and objectives, then we have a problem that needs to be fixed, right? If it's a problem, then let's fix it. From a phase zero perspective, I always like to think of this as prep work, right? There's always work that you should do to be ready. And people want to rush in. They get approval for these massive amounts of money to spend on ERP, and they're in such a hurry to spend that money. And that's kind of contrary to the purpose of the project itself, which is to take what we're doing and transform the business in a way that emphasizes what happens after go live. You're not implementing ERP for the process of implementing ERP. There are very few people on planet Earth that like to do that.
Right.
It's all about what happens afterwards. And phase zero is about preparing for that so that when you go through the process of implementing enterprise software, you're prepared for the benefits that happen afterwards, and you have a launch pad for achieving them. So glad to be here today. I always enjoyed being on the podcast. So
yeah, I'm glad to have you again, and excited to cover this topic. We don't cover it enough, probably. It's one of those topics that we talk a lot about internally at Third Stage. We talk about it with our clients a lot, but on this podcast and in our sort of public-facing content, we don't talk about it nearly enough, and I think it's something that's really important. I'm glad we're diving into it here today. And a lot of the work you mentioned, a lot of the work you're doing and that we're doing at the company is implementation phase zero type stuff. I guess before we jump into understanding what phase zero is and what do we mean by implementation planning in phase zero, maybe tell us a little bit about what you do at Third Stage, just so people understand sort of the breadth of exposure you have to our clients.
So at Third Stage, my role as managing director is to strategically oversee all of the happenings on our major projects, frankly on all our client projects. So if we have a project ongoing with you, there's a pretty darn good chance I know exactly who you are. So my role is to get involved in all the bits and pieces so that we're delivering the level of quality that's expected of us by our clients and by ourselves. We have a high standard at Third Stage, and that's on purpose. From a perspective of what that means for phase zero readiness, that high standard is applied to walking into an implementation and a kickoff that's ready to go. If you just sign it and the system integrator shows up on Monday, the chances that you're not ready to go are pretty high unless you spent a lot of time prior to that getting ready to go. This includes knowing where your processes are going to change, which people are going to be impacted by that, and what your core team is going to look like for your implementation. There are a lot of unknown unknowns that are going to come up during your implementation that you can prepare for by having a structure in place to accommodate them. Yeah, you're not going to know which holes you're going to find and where until you actually find them, but you can be ready for how to respond to those types of challenges, and that's a big chunk of what phase zero is about.
Right. Yeah, in fact, as we're getting into questions here, what I'm going to do real quickly for the audience is I'm going to pop up on the screen a QR code for a phase zero checklist. And as we're talking through a lot of what Adam and I are going to dive into here, you can actually scan that QR code on the screen in front of you to download our phase zero checklist. And we're going to dive into a lot of what you see on that checklist. We'll dive into in more detail throughout this conversation. You started to describe it a little bit, but maybe if we sort of back up and for someone that just has never heard this term phase zero, they don't really know what to expect during an implementation planning phase of a project. Maybe tell us a little bit about what exactly is implementation planning. What is phase zero?
Yeah.
And why is it so important to a project to be successful?
Yeah, well, I think this is important in a couple of ways. And if you strip down ERP to its most basic tenets, let's say that all you're doing is moving from one ERP system to another. Where let's say we are moving from ECC6 to SAP S/4HANA. That's about as clean of a transformation as it gets as it pertains to lift and shift implementation. But what you're going to be told by your system integrator in very many cases is that it's just an upgrade, but it simply is not. We're not upgrading software. We are changing software. And so when we think about what phase zero is, even in the simplest fashion, we're going to be changing our processes. That's kind of the point, right? Unless you're on SAP and you're changing just because SAP is making you, the point here is to gain some efficiencies. And even if you are moving into S/4HANA because you have to, you should be focused on the efficiencies that you're going to gain, because you can recode S/4HANA in a way that just reemphasizes all of your broken processes and makes them more expensive. So let's look at our processes and where we expect those efficiencies to come from. And if we know where they're going to come from, we can focus on achieving them, right? We don't want that to happen by accident. The second part is, who's this going to impact? Even if we're talking about a lift and shift, the dramatic impact on people is going to be felt organization-wide. You can change ERP, and the folks that drive the forklift that will never log into the ERP that you're implementing are going to be impacted, because it's going to change possibly where things are put away, where they're picked from, and how it is we start thinking about restocking, those types of efficiencies. So process and people change are really important, because at the end of this implementation process, you're going to go live. You're going to want people to use this system. And if they're not ready for that, knowing what's coming, then you have a problem, though they won't use it. You just spent a lot of money on something that's not going to get emphasized. So those two pieces, the technical component of it is a piece that you should be prepared for on things like infrastructure and the like. And these are all things that you should be planning on ahead of time, so that you can create a structure for achieving the benefits that you're looking for, greasing the skids that are going to be able to make things happen a little bit easier for your people, and having the technology in place. The easiest part about the technology, for example, is how big of a shift is this for your data? What is the state of your data? And if you don't know that going into the implementation, you find that out 6 months before go live, you're not going live in 6 months. It's just as simple as that. You need to know what you have to start now. And then you need to have that stuff done. And if it needs to be done before you sign a contract, then do it before you sign a contract. Those types of activities will yield benefits. The last part of it is you need to have an organization that's responsible for managing your implementation. We call it a mission control PMO at third stage. But the point is that you had to have a team that does this. This isn't a one-person job. It's certainly not a one-person part-time job in addition to their full-time job already. You're going to have a team of folks that are responsible for managing this, pulling in other people who are impacted along the way, subject matter experts that maybe own a niche part of your process, and then engaging them in a way where they understand what's happening. So these are just some key components of how it is you want to be ready and what needs to be in place beforehand, so that when you start your implementation, the pieces are there, the structure is there, and you're not sitting around waiting for the system integrator to send you a bill while you figure out where your footing is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you described earlier the dynamic that often comes into play at organizations where they get the budgetary approval and they're so excited to just start spending money, and people are generally excited about the new future state, whether it's, moving to SAP S/4HANA or Microsoft D365 or Oracle Fusion, whatever the new technology is you might be deploying. People are so excited that there's all this momentum and excitement that builds up that causes people to make mistakes early on, ironically or strangely enough. Not intentionally, of course, but they just want to jump in and start building stuff and deploying stuff without really thinking through, well, what does this mean to our business? What are we trying to accomplish? What are our business processes going to look like? How are we going to handle data? How are we going to deploy resources? All that stuff.